Before we begin, if this is your first time here, welcome to Still Missing. This is the channel where we dig into the world's most haunting, unsolved cases, the ones that were buried, forgotten, or never explained. New episodes drop every Monday and Thursday. Subscribe so you don't miss a single case. In February 1959, 9 experienced hikers set out across the northern Ural mountains in Soviet Russia. They were young, fit, and well prepared. None of them would return alive. When search parties finally found their tent weeks later, it had been slashed open from the inside. The hikers had fled into the frozen wilderness, some barefoot, in temperatures of -30 degrees. What they found next defied explanation. This is the Dyatlov Pass Incident. And after more than 60 years, we still don't know what really happened. The group was led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, an engineering student at the Ural Polytechnic Institute. He was joined by 8 others, 7 men and 2 women, most of them fellow students or recent graduates. Their goal was to reach Otorty, a mountain in the northern Urals, a challenging route that would earn them the highest Soviet hiking certification. They departed from the city of Svetlana, now Yekaterinburg, on January 23, 1959. By January 28th, they had reached the edge of the highland area. One member, Yuri Yudin, turned back due to illness. He was the only one who would survive. The remaining 9 pressed on into the mountains. On the evening of February 1st, the group set up camp on the slope of Kolat Sayakon, a Mansi name, meaning dead mountain. It was an unusual choice. They were exposed to harsh winds with no tree cover. Dyatlov may have chosen the spot to practice navigating open terrain, or perhaps darkness forced them to stop. They pitched their large tent, had dinner, and settled in. That was the last anyone heard from them. When Igor Dyatlov failed to send a telegram by February 12th as planned, no one was immediately alarmed. Delays were normal in the wilderness. But by February 20th, families began to worry. A search party of volunteer hikers was organized, followed by military and police units with aircraft support. On February 26th, searchers discovered the tent on the mountainside. What they saw made no sense. The tent was partially collapsed and covered in snow. But it had been cut open from the inside, long slashes made with a knife, as if someone had desperately tried to escape. Footprints led away from the tent, heading downhill toward a tree line about 1.5 kilometers away. Some of the prints appeared to be barefoot, others showed only socks. The first 2 bodies were found on February 27th, near a large cedar tree at the edge of the forest. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko were wearing almost nothing, just underwear and socks. A small fire had been started at the base of the tree, but it had burned out quickly. Branches on the cedar had been broken off up to 5 meters high, suggesting someone had climbed it, possibly to look back toward the tent. 3 more bodies were found between the cedar and the tent over the following days. Igor Dyatlov was found about 300 meters from the cedar, frozen in a position suggesting he was trying to return to the tent. Zina Kolmogorova was found higher up the slope, also heading back. Rustam Slobodin was between them, with a small crack in his skull. The remaining 4 were not found until May, when the snow began to melt. They were discovered in a ravine, about 75 meters from the cedar, buried under 4 meters of snow. These 4 had the most disturbing injuries. Lyudmila Dubinina had major chest fractures, and her tongue was missing. Semyon Zolotaryov had similar chest injuries. Nikolai Thibobrignol had severe skull damage. The medical examiner compared the force required to cause these injuries to that of a car crash, yet there were no external wounds. The 4th member in the ravine, Alexander Kolevatov, showed no major trauma. Some of these final 4 were wearing clothing taken from those who had died first, suggesting the group had tried to survive by sharing gear. Soviet investigators arrived at a baffling conclusion. The official cause of death for 6 of the 9 was hypothermia. For the other 3, it was listed as fatal injuries caused by a compelling natural force. The case was closed in May 1959, and the files were sealed. Lev Ivanov, the lead investigator, would later reveal that he had been ordered to close the case by Soviet authorities. He also mentioned strange orange spheres that had been reported in the sky over the Urals that winter by multiple witnesses, including other hiking groups and military personnel. The investigation had noted several anomalies. Some of the hikers' clothing showed traces of radioactive contamination. The skin of some bodies had an unusual orange-brown discoloration, and the decision to cut their way out of a tent in lethal cold without proper clothing suggested they were fleeing something they feared more than the freezing temperatures outside. The most widely discussed explanation is an avalanche, specifically a slab avalanche. In 2021, researchers from Switzerland published a study using advanced snow simulation models, arguing that a small but powerful slab avalanche could have struck the tent in the middle of the night. This would explain the chest and skull fractures found on several hikers. It would also explain why they cut their way out. If the tent entrance was blocked by heavy snow, slashing through the side would be the fastest escape. Critics point out several problems. No debris field was ever found. The tent was not buried. The slope angle where they camped was considered too gentle for an avalanche. And experienced hikers would likely have recognized avalanche-prone terrain and avoided it. Still, proponents argue that a delayed slab release, possibly triggered by accumulated snowfall, could occur on relatively modest slopes under certain wind conditions. Another prominent theory involves Soviet military testing. The Ural region was home to several secret military installations during the Cold War. Parachute mines, explosive devices dropped from aircraft were reportedly tested in the area around that time. Some researchers believe the group may have witnessed or been caught in a military test, possibly involving a concussive blast that could explain the internal injuries without external wounds. The radioactive traces on clothing could support this certain military equipment, and weapons involved radioactive materials. The orange spheres seen in the sky could have been rocket launches or test detonations. This theory also provides a motive for the Soviet government to suppress the investigation. If the military was responsible, even indirectly, the case would have been classified immediately. The rapid closure of the investigation and the sealing of files lend weight to this interpretation. A more unusual theory involves infrasound. When strong winds pass over certain terrain features, like the dome-shaped top of Polat Siak, they can generate very low-frequency sound waves below the range of human hearing. Studies have shown that infrasound can cause feelings of intense fear, panic, disorientation, and even difficulty breathing. A katabatic wind event, a sudden, powerful downslope wind, combined with infrasound, could have created an overwhelming sense of terror inside the tent. The hikers, gripped by irrational panic, may have slashed their way out and fled blindly into the darkness. Once separated from their shelter and gear, hypothermia would have set in rapidly. The injuries to the four in the ravine could have resulted from falling into the deep snow-covered gully in the dark. Early in the investigation, suspicion briefly fell on the local Mansi people, indigenous inhabitants of the region. Polat Siak held spiritual significance, and some speculated the hikers had trespassed on sacred land. However, this theory was quickly dismissed. There was no evidence of any other people at the scene. The footprints leading from the tent belonged only to the 9 hikers. The Mansi cooperated fully with investigators and were among those who helped search for the missing group. Other murder theories, including escaped prisoners from nearby labor camps, faced the same fundamental problem. There was no evidence of anyone else being present. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the investigation. After a new review, they concluded in 2020 that an avalanche was the most likely cause. Though many researchers and family members rejected this finding as incomplete, the truth is, no single theory perfectly explains everything. The avalanche model accounts for the injuries, but not the lack of debris. Military testing explains the radioactivity and the cover-up, but relies on circumstantial evidence. Infrasound explains the panic, but not the severe trauma. What we know for certain is this: 9 people fled their tent in terror. Barely clothed, into one of the most hostile environments on Earth. Some tried to build a fire, some tried to walk back, some fell into a ravine. All of them died. The Dyatlov Pass remains one of the most compelling unsolved cases in history, not because of what we know, but because of what we don't. And the mountain they died on still carries the name it had long before they arrived, Dead Mountain. Next week, we travel to a remote farm in Bavaria, 1922. An entire family was slaughtered with a pickaxe, and evidence suggests the killer stayed in the house for days, feeding the livestock, sleeping in their beds. The Hinkle-Pathik murders. Don't miss it. I want to hear from you. Which theory do you find most convincing? Avalanche, military cover-up, or something else? Drop your answer in the comments. If this case kept you up thinking, hit subscribe. We drop new cases every Monday and Thursday. This is Still Missing. Some cases never close.